So it's another morning at Osborne Mountain Overlook. A little bit later today because I'm done with teaching, so it's 10 a.m. instead of 8 a.m. And we have a great view of Grandfather Mountain today. And right here at the parking lot, there's a great patch of pussy toes. And there's actually lots of insects flying around here today. Fleabane is up and blooming as well. So you see a lot of these on the roadsides right now. In this elevation of the parkway, the trees are now pretty much leafed out. So we're heading straight for summer. Temperatures today are also back up into the summer range. The grasses are blooming, and there's lots of insects here in the meadow. So grasses don't necessarily have the showiest of flowers, but yes, they're flowering plants. They're just wind pollinated, so they don't need the showy petals because they don't need to attract pollinators. We've got the fresh maygreen now, even on the evergreens. So this one here is a hemlock. You can see those new leaves coming out there. We also have fresh young green on these pine trees, the pine saplings here. So that's the new growth for this year. The Canada mayflowers are now starting to bloom. We've got one right there. So here we've got more ferns coming up. You can see the fiddleheads there. Now if you want to know what species of fern you have, often you have to look at the sporangia on the leaves. So here's one of last year's old leaves. So let me flip that around and see if we can still see some sporangia. Oh yeah. You can see the sporangia or the sori on this leaf there. This might be intermediate wood fern. The Christmas fern is now almost done unfurling its leaves. And they have their sporangia on the upper leaflets. So those leaflets right there at the top of the plant. You can see the sporangia starting to form on the underside. So Christmas fern is one of those ferns that makes what's called an indusium, which is a little covering on top of the sorus. So what you see there are indusia. The black dot in the center is the stalk, and underneath that indusium is where the sporangia will form. Lots of new, shiny poison ivy leaves. So yeah, these leaves have a lot of that oil in them that causes the rash. So if you're allergic, watch out for these. Now on this tree, we've got some Virginia creeper growing up. You can tell the difference between Virginia creeper and poison ivy based on the number of leaflets. Poison ivy, as you probably know, has 3, and Virginia creeper has 5. Found some cinquefoil here. That's another plant that has leaves with 5 leaflets. And then it makes these yellow strawberry-like flowers. There's still some nice violets out here, especially these blue ones. Also already saw some of the sweet white violets, the small white ones. I think the yellow ones are probably all done. We'll see if we can still find some along the trail. The robin's plantain is still going here, but these flowers look like they've seen better days, so they're probably at the end of their bloom period now. We've still got a couple Jack in the Pulpits. So there's one still in bloom right there. And we still have a couple of the yellow violets here. But look at how tall they've gotten since they first came up. Now, as these violets go to seed, they make these seed capsules. So you see a lot of these now around the forest here. A lot of them have gone to seed already. We've still got quite a few trilliums here. And you can see these white trilliums actually, as they age, turn pink. Now here we've got an interesting plant among the trilliums. That is a rattlesnake fern, or sometimes I think also called grape fern, because their fertile frond looks like it's got little grapes on top. The golden ragwort is going to seed. You can see it makes these dandelion-like puffy seed heads. So those seeds are dispersed by wind. The bellworts are pretty much done blooming. They're now going to seed. So you see seed capsules on some of these. Now the bloodroots are long done blooming, but the plants are still out there and they are developing seed pods. The special thing about the seeds of the bloodroot actually is that they are dispersed by ants. We've got some nice, colorful wild geraniums blooming here now. It's starting to look like summer out there. Look at all that green. I think pretty much all the trees are leafed out now. We still have a couple of chickweeds in bloom here. So that's our native star chickweed. Now here we've got a little plant in bloom that a lot of people are familiar with from their gardens as a weed. This is the non-native chickweed. You can see it has much smaller flowers than our native one. So here's one of those light gaps. And we see a lot of stuff now growing up in these. We've got May-apples, we've got lilies coming up, we've got all sorts of things in bloom here as well. So we see these white flowers, that's sweet cicely. And then some people have asked me about those big leaves, very noticeable in here. That's Great Indian Plantain. And then it looks like we've got a blue cohosh in bloom right there. So lots of things in this meadow right now. And later in the summer, there's going to be lots and lots of lilies. So you can see these coming up there. Oh yeah, lots of lilies. The May-apples are still in bloom. But you have to actually look underneath the leaves to find the flowers. And as I mentioned before, only the plants that have 2 leaves actually bloom. So here's a nice example of that Great Indian Plantain. And they have these ribbed stems on the leaves, kind of resembling rhubarb. There are some nettles growing up now. And yes, these can sting you. But these are Canadian wood nettles, it looks like. The actual stinging nettle has opposite leaves. This one has alternate leaves. So that's how you can tell the wood nettle from the actual stinging nettle. Now, stinging nettle is native to Europe. These wood nettles are native to the US here. So Sweet Cicely has these dissected leaves and tiny white flowers. Another characteristic how you can tell it is if you crush one of the young leaves, it definitely smells like licorice. And then some of these flowers are already going to seed, so you can start seeing the developing seed pods on there. So here we've got a little bee. Just some more pretty flowers. And yes, they do attract pollinators. So these little iridescent bees are some of our native bees here. They're much smaller than honeybees. This is wild geranium time out here in the forest. So these are one of the showiest flowers out here. They're also called cranesbill because the developing seed pods, you can see those on there as well, kind of look like a bird's beak. We've still got some of the fairy bells in bloom as well. Solomon seal is up now and budding. So this carries the flowers underneath the leaves. And false Solomon seal, or Solomon's plume, is about ready to bloom as well. And you can tell these apart because these have their flowers actually at the top of the stem here. So we've still got some of the meadow rue in bloom here. This is the male, and those stamens are pretty much turning brown. So they're at the end of their bloom period now. They're going to lose their flowers because once the male is done spreading pollen, they no longer serve a purpose. In contrast to that, the female is actually going to keep its flowers, so at least the ovary part, because that's where the seeds are developing. So they hold on to theirs and then start developing into seed pods. Now here's a plant that I don't know yet what it is. I'll have to look that up at home. The pollinators seem to like it. So this is hooked buttercup, demonstrating why it is called hooked buttercup. You can see how there's hooks actually on these seeds, on the seed capsule. That's of course a mechanism for this plant to spread its seeds. Those hooks will attach themselves, for example, to animal fur, and that's how they spread around. Here's another plant that uses hooks. Some people may know this as cleavers, and just look at all these tiny little hooked hairs on the leaves and the stem. So if you touch this plant, it will stick to you. So these arrowhead-shaped leaves are another plant some people ask me about. I've heard it called lion's foot, and it has the habit of changing the shape of its leaves as it grows older. So that plant over there is another one of those. And those leaves already look more dissected. So it's a very confusing plant. These leaves with that reddish-brown pattern, those are another very characteristic leaf, easy to recognize. That's Virginia jump seed. So they will bloom later in the year, and then they make explosive seeds. So here we are at the northern end of the trail, and some folks asked me about these blue flowers that you see growing in the grass. That is speedwell. There's a couple of different species. I'm never fully sure which one.